My unfaithful wife and her boss ignored my warnings. Little did they know their world of lies would shatter before their own colleagues. The revenge was incredible. Be me, 29-year-old Robert Anderson. Never thought I'd be telling a story like this. Never imagined I'd be the guy whose wife was cheating. People always say you'd know if your wife was cheating. I thought the same thing until that night when everything fell apart. It all started at Richard's annual office party. He was my wife Bella's boss. Never liked the guy from day one. Always too friendly. Always too smug. Especially around Bella. I pushed those thoughts aside though. She was my wife. I loved her. I trusted her. She always said Richard was just a good friend. Called him her mentor. Nothing more. That night was different though. Maybe it was the bourbon. Maybe he just stopped caring who saw Richard was getting handsy. Pulling Bella close. Whispering things in her ear. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into it. At first, I thought I was overreacting. Tried to tell myself it was just harmless fun. Then I saw that smug grin on his face. The kind that cuts right through you. Like he was laughing at some private joke. Some joke that only he and Bella knew. He looked right at me and smirked. His arm still wrapped around her waist. That twisted, smug look made my stomach drop. I knew right then. This wasn't just an innocent office friendship. Tried to laugh it off. Tried to tell myself it was nothing. But then he leaned in closer. Whispering just loud enough for me to hear. Commenting about my kids. Suggesting they might not be mine. That was it. I was done pretending this was nothing. I looked right at him. Shot back with my own comment. Funny you say that, Richard. Your wife's been telling me the same thing. Smugness disappeared from his face instantly. Replaced by shock. He wasn't expecting me to hit back. And I wasn't done yet. In that moment, everything started clicking into place. All the late nights. All the work trips. The way she'd pull away when I tried to get close. Suddenly it all made perfect sense. I'd been so blind. So trusting. Thinking my wife would never betray me like this. But there she was. Standing right next to her lover. Grinning at my humiliation. Like it was some big joke. I wanted to scream. Wanted to grab him. Wanted to wipe that arrogant look off his face. But before I could do anything, there was a commotion at the door. His wife walked in. She wasn't alone. She'd brought the police with her. Like some twisted end to a soap opera. No one asked to watch this drama unfold. I didn't know what she knew, or how she knew it. But at that point, I was too angry to care. All I knew was that Richard and Bella had crossed a line, and they were about to pay for it. My head was spinning as I watched the officers approach. I felt betrayed, felt humiliated. But most of all, I felt stupid. Stupid for ever believing her lies. Thought about every time I'd covered for her. Every time I'd made excuses. When she didn't come home until late. Telling myself she was just working hard. I had been the fool. The husband in the dark. They'd been laughing behind my back all along. But this was only the beginning. I wasn't going to be the victim in their story. If they wanted to challenge me, they'd find out the hard way. Just who they were dealing with. As the cops led Richard away in handcuffs. His smug grin finally wiped clean. I saw Bella's face shift. First, she looked stunned, maybe even a little afraid. But then that same arrogant look crept onto her face. She folded her arms, tilted her head, smirked like she thought this was just a bad joke. My wife, the woman I'd spent over a decade with, was standing there, acting like I was the one making a scene. Seriously, Robert, she sneered. Are you really doing this right here, right now? I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Here she was, caught red-handed, and she had the nerve to act like I was the problem. The party around us had fallen silent. People were staring, whispering. I could feel their eyes on me. Some pitying, some curious, all of them waiting to see what I'd do next. And God, I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell everyone, every ugly, sordid detail, everything she and Richard had done. Wanted to rip her carefully crafted image to shreds, right in front of everyone she cared about. But instead, I just stood there, looking at her, trying to understand how the woman I loved could turn into such a stranger. Couldn't even find the words. They all felt too small, too weak to express the mess inside my head. She rolled her eyes, let out a dramatic sigh, and muttered, "Grow up, Robert. It's not like it's the end of the world." Not the end of the world? I repeated. My voice barely a whisper. You betrayed me, Bella. You lied to me over and over, made a fool out of me in front of everyone, and you're just indifferent. She laughed, actually laughed, and shrugged. Oh, come on. Let's not pretend this marriage was some fairy tale. You know as well as I do that things were broken long before Richard. I just took the initiative. My fists clenched, my jaw tightened. Every nerve in my body was screaming for me to walk away, to end this twisted conversation before it broke me any further. But there was this twisted curiosity gnawing at me, a need to know how deep her betrayal went. So it was all a lie? I asked, my voice raw. Every night? Every promise? All of it? She looked at me, that smirk never leaving her face. You were comfortable, Robert. Predictable. I got bored, okay? Richard is different. He knows what he wants. He knows how to take charge. Unlike you. Her words hit like punches, each one chipping away at my identity, at the last shreds of the man I thought I was. She looked at me like I was some nuisance, something standing between her and her twisted idea of freedom. It was as if she was rewriting our entire history, painting herself as some victim, trapped in a dull marriage, and all I could think was, who is this woman? The onlookers were murmuring, eyes darting back and forth between us, like they were watching a car crash. They couldn't look away from. Bella, shameless as ever, looked around and gave a little shrug, as if to say, well, that's that. I felt my stomach twist, with a mix of anger and disbelief. Was she really that heartless? Then, as if the universe had decided to throw one more curveball, her phone buzzed. She pulled it out, glanced at the screen. A small, satisfied smile crossed her lips. Gotta go, she said, slipping her phone back into her purse. I have better things to do than listen to you whine about your hurt feelings. And just like that, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there. In the wreckage of everything we built together, I watched her saunter off, her heels clicking against the floor, as if she hadn't just shattered my life. In front of everyone we knew, the crowd around me started to disperse, murmuring quietly, casting glances at me, filled with a mix of pity and intrigue. I could almost hear their thoughts. Poor Robert. Didn't see it coming. She's been cheating on him this whole time. But something snapped inside me at that moment. I was done being the victim, done feeling humiliated and torn apart. She thought she could just walk away, throw me out like yesterday's trash, and carry on with her little fantasy life. No. If she wanted a war, she'd get one. After that disastrous party, I barely slept. The humiliation, the anger, the betrayal. It all churned inside me, eating away at my sanity. But beneath all that pain, a strange clarity began to form. I realized something important. While she'd stripped away the illusion of our marriage, she hadn't taken everything. In fact, there was something she didn't see coming. Bella thought she could just walk out, start a new life with Richard, free of consequences. She thought I'd just roll over, take the punches, maybe cry about it to a lawyer. But she had no idea what I was capable of. When pushed to the edge, I wasn't going to be the sad, predictable husband. She'd painted me as, if she wanted to live her life without me, I'd give her exactly what she wanted, on my terms. Spent the next few days digging, peeling back the layers of her deception, piecing together a plan. Turned out Bella wasn't as smart as she thought. She'd left a trail of breadcrumbs, a late-night receipt here, a hotel booking there, even a secret credit card under her maiden name. The more I uncovered, the angrier I got. But that anger kept me laser-focused. Every little detail, every slip-up she'd made, was ammunition. And soon I'd have enough to turn the tables completely. And then there was Richard. I found out he wasn't exactly clean himself. In his position at the company, he'd been cutting corners, doing some shady deals on the side, financial records, private correspondence. It was all there, hidden in plain sight, just waiting for someone to look. With the right leverage, I could expose both of them, ruin their little fantasy, make sure they both felt the sting of betrayal. Finally, I reached out to Kimberly, Richard's wife. She'd been at the party when the police showed up, and I'd seen the look in her eyes that night. She was just as blindsided as I was. I figured if anyone would be interested in a bit of payback, it would be her. I didn't have to explain much. The moment I mentioned evidence, she was in. We met up the next day at a coffee shop in Riverside. Away from prying eyes, Kimberly looked like a woman on the edge, but there was a fire in her eyes that mirrored my own. She leaned in close, her voice low. You don't know the half of it, Robert. Richard's been hiding money, lying to clients, covering things up, and now he's risking it all to chase after her. She spat the last word out like poison. I want in. Whatever you're planning, I want in. So we made a pact, a quiet alliance, bound by a shared need for revenge. Together we'd gather every piece of dirt, build an airtight case, and wait for the perfect moment to strike. Over the next few weeks, Kimberly and I put our plan into motion. It was slow, methodical, and at times agonizing. Bella and Richard were careful, but they weren't infallible. They still made mistakes, still left traces, thinking no one would notice. Meanwhile, I played my part, acting the hurt husband, trying to understand his wife's perspective, while gathering every scrap of proof I could. Bella didn't suspect a thing. Then came the day, when everything was ready. Kimberly and I had enough evidence to ruin them both. Financial misdeeds, infidelity, even a few questionable practices Richard had swept under the rug at work. With this, we could destroy Not only their relationship, but their careers, their reputations, everything they built together, on the lies they told us. But we weren't just going to reveal it. We wanted them to feel it, to understand what it was like, to watch everything you cared about crumble before your eyes. I'll never forget the look on Bella's face. When I suggested a fresh start, a vacation, she blinked, clearly caught off guard, then narrowed her eyes, like she was trying to see if I was serious. But I played my part perfectly. Humble, a little broken, but eager to reconnect with my wife. Just us, I said, forcing a smile. Somewhere quiet. No distractions, no work. Just time to talk? She hesitated, probably suspecting I had some other motive. But in the end, her arrogance won out. I could see it in her eyes. That glint of triumph. In her mind, she had already won. This was me crawling back, hoping to salvage whatever scraps were left of our marriage. Little did she know, the vacation wasn't meant to heal us. It was meant to break her. Meanwhile, Kimberly and I had been planning every detail. The vacation was just a cover for the real event. It would buy us time to put the final pieces in place. Richard, of course, would be left in the dark. We knew he'd contact Bella while we were away. He couldn't resist, and when he did, that would be the signal for everything to fall into motion. The day before we were set to leave, I met up with Kimberly one last time. We reviewed our evidence, every document, every message, every record of their betrayal. It was all there, neatly packaged, ready to unleash. Kimberly had even managed to get her hands on a couple of Richard's questionable business transactions, enough to raise eyebrows and trigger an investigation at his firm. We were both on edge, fueled by the anticipation of finally seeing them face the consequences. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Kimberly asked, giving me a hard look. "Once we do this, there's no going back?" I nodded, feeling a strange calm settle over me. "They challenged us, Kimberly. They didn't think we'd fight back. Now they'll find out." As I stood there watching Bella, with my carefully crafted expression of innocence, I almost marveled at how little she really knew me. The woman I'd once loved, the woman who could read every thought that crossed my mind, had been replaced by this stranger, someone who saw only what she wanted to see. And right now she saw a desperate husband, a broken man, willing to do anything for another chance. The satisfaction of knowing how wrong she was felt like a strange, bitter comfort. That evening as we packed for our reconciliation trip, I could feel the tension radiating from her. She was on edge, probably from the combination of guilt and annoyance. Guilt because somewhere deep down, she knew what she'd done was unforgivable. Annoyance because she was used to getting what she wanted, used to bending people to her will, with a pout or a well-timed apology. But I was done bending. On the drive to the secluded cabin I'd booked for us, Bella kept glancing at her phone, probably itching to message Richard, to let him know she'd handled it. I couldn't help but smile at the thought of how unprepared she was for what was coming. With each mile we drove, the knots in my stomach loosened, replaced by a cold, calculated calm. By the time we pulled up to the cabin, I knew exactly what needed to be done. The cabin was perfect, isolated, quiet, with no prying eyes and limited cell service. It was the kind of place meant for peace and reconciliation, which made it the perfect cover for what I was about to set in motion. As we settled in, I watched her closely, looking for any cracks in her armor. She had a wary look, as if she was bracing herself for an emotional conversation. Good. Let her think this was about us, about repairing the damage she'd done. In reality, I was giving her one last chance. To be honest, that night, as we sat by the fireplace, I poured us both a glass of wine and took a deep breath. The air felt thick with tension, the kind that made every word feel heavier than it should. "Bella," I started, keeping my tone soft, "I need to know, are you really committed to fixing this?" She looked at me, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if assessing whether this was a trap. She forced a smile, trying to mask her discomfort. "Of course, Robert. I mean, we wouldn't be here if I wasn't, right?" I nodded, watching her carefully. "I just need honesty, Bella. I need to know everything. No more secrets?" Her eyes flickered, a brief flash of fear, before she smothered it with another fake smile. "Robert, I've told you everything. I messed up, okay? I made mistakes. But can't we just leave it in the past?" "Everything?" I pressed, my voice steady. "You've told me everything, Bella?" She looked away, her jaw clenched. I could see her fingers twitching around the stem of her wine glass. She wasn't used to this kind of pressure, wasn't used to facing consequences. But instead of admitting the full extent of her betrayal, she doubled down. "Yes, everything," she said, her voice tinged with irritation. "What more do you want from me?" I leaned back, studying her, feeling a sickening mixture of anger and pity. Even now, faced with the potential of reconciliation, she couldn't bring herself to be honest. She was too arrogant, too sure that I would accept whatever scraps of truth she decided to throw my way. I took a deep breath, gathering my resolve. "Okay," I said, my voice calm. "If that's the story you want to stick to?" The rest of the evening passed in tense silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. I pretended to be processing, giving her the illusion of power, letting her think she'd won. I could feel her relaxing her guard, slowly dropping, as she convinced herself that she'd successfully manipulated me into forgiving her. Early the next morning, while she was still asleep, I put the final piece of my plan into action. I'd left my phone strategically out in the open, on the small table by the couch. It was unlocked, with a carefully curated series of messages visible. Messages between me and Kimberly, detailing everything we discovered, every plan we'd set in motion. It was a risky move, but I knew Bella, her curiosity, her arrogance, would make it impossible for her to resist. As I predicted, she took the bait. I watched from the bedroom doorway, hidden in the shadows, as she crept out of bed and made her way to the phone. She glanced around, her expression cautious, then picked up my phone and started scrolling through the messages. The more she read, the paler she got, her face draining of color, as she realized how much we knew, how thoroughly we'd unraveled her lies. I could see the panic building in her eyes, the dawning understanding that her little fantasy was over. She clutched the phone, her breathing quickening, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear on her face. Not anger, not defiance, but real, bone-deep fear. It was as if the mask she'd worn for months was finally cracking, exposing the fragile, desperate woman underneath. When she finally looked up and saw me standing in the doorway, her expression shifted to something close to pleading. "Robert, I can explain," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. I stepped forward, each word cutting like ice. "Explain, Bella. The time for explanations is long past. I gave you every chance to be honest, to come clean, but you chose to lie. Over and over again." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. For the first time, she had nothing to say. The woman who always had a snappy comeback, who could manipulate anyone to her will, was speechless. "Did you really think you could just walk all over me? Take everything we built and leave me with nothing?" I asked, my voice rising. She shook her head, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Please, Robert, let's just talk about this. We can work it out." I almost laughed. "Work it out? You don't get it, do you? This isn't about fixing anything. This is about consequences." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "I warned you not to challenge me, Bella. I warned you both. But you didn't listen. Now you'll find out the hard way just what that means." With that, I turned and walked out, leaving her standing alone in the cabin, surrounded by the fragments of the life she tried to destroy. She'd made her choices, and now there was no escaping the consequences. The pieces were in place, and there was no going back. As I walked away from the cabin, the morning air felt crisp and clean against my skin, almost like it was washing away the weight I'd carried for so long. The fog of hurt and betrayal lifted a little more with each step, replaced by a fierce, calculated clarity. Bella might have thought she'd won, might have thought she'd slipped away unscathed, but she had no idea how thoroughly her world was about to come crashing down. I got in the car and drove a few miles down the winding forest road. Until I had cell service, there was one more message to send, one final domino to tip, and then I could let the whole thing play out. I typed a quick message to Kimberly. Just 3 words. "It's done now." Kimberly and I had agreed on every detail of this plan. Once she got my signal, she'd release the evidence we gathered on both Bella and Richard. Evidence that would shake up not only their lives, but their careers and reputations as well. With Kimberly's connections and Richard's record of dirty dealings, it wouldn't take long for things to go public, and I'd made sure there was more than enough to ruin them both. I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the phone in my hand. A strange sense of satisfaction welled up inside me, mingling with a hint of sadness. It was surreal to think that this was the woman I'd once built a life with, shared dreams with, but the woman I'd loved was gone, replaced by someone who'd carved me up piece by piece and left me to bleed. Suddenly my phone buzzed with an incoming call. I didn't recognize the number, but a gut feeling told me to answer it. "Robert," a voice crackled through the line, panic lacing every word. It was Bella. I must have left her alone in the cabin, long enough for her to find another phone, or drive somewhere to get a signal. Either way, the desperation in her voice was palpable. "What do you want, Bella?" I asked, my tone cold. Please, Robert, don't do this, she said, her voice breaking. Whatever you're planning, you don't have to go through with it. We can talk. We can fix this. Fix this? I almost laughed, but it came out as more of a bitter scoff. You lied to me. You cheated on me. And now you want to fix this? What exactly is there left to fix, Bella? She fell silent, struggling for words. For a woman who had always been so sure of herself, who had flaunted her arrogance and dismissive attitude at every turn, it was almost satisfying to hear her struggle, to hear her voice laced with fear. Robert, I made mistakes, okay? She stammered. But we don't have to destroy each other. We can just move on. Leave it behind us. Leave it behind us, I repeated, my voice rising with each word. You humiliated me. You twisted every promise we made into a lie. And you think I should just let it go? She fell silent again, her breathing audible through the line. I could almost imagine her, standing alone in the cabin, clutching the phone like it was a lifeline, hoping I'd back down. But she didn't understand. I was beyond forgiving, beyond backing down. Listen to me, Bella, I said, each word deliberate and unyielding. I warned you. I gave you a chance to come clean. To be honest, but you kept lying. So now you're going to face the consequences. Robert, please, her voice wavered. But I cut her off before she could start her manipulative plea again. You thought you were untouchable, didn't you? I asked. My tone like steel. You thought you could play me for a fool. Walk away unscathed. But you're not untouchable. And neither is Richard. By now his company's already seen the evidence of his little schemes. And by tomorrow, everyone will know the truth about you too. Robert, no, please. This will ruin us, she cried, her voice cracking under the weight of her fear. I paused, letting the silence stretch out, letting her feel the full weight of what she'd done. That's the point, Bella. With that, I hung up, feeling an odd mix of triumph and emptiness settle in my chest. The call had been cathartic, like a final goodbye to the woman I thought I knew, the woman I'd once loved, but the satisfaction of revenge couldn't completely fill the hollow place where that love had been. Betrayal is a funny thing. It robs you of someone else, but it also strips away pieces of yourself. I sat there for a while, staring out at the early morning mist, replaying the years Bella and I had shared. There were good memories, genuine moments of love and laughter, but they all felt tainted now, wrapped up in the lies she'd spun. I wasn't the same man I was before, and maybe that was the final cruelty of her betrayal. It had changed me in ways I couldn't undo. But life doesn't wait for healing. Pushes forward indifferent to the wounds it inflicts. And so I took a deep breath, started the car, and left the cabin behind. Back in town, the fallout happened faster than I had expected. Within days, Richard's company faced intense scrutiny, with legal repercussions and financial losses spiraling out of control. He went from being the respected boss, the man in charge, to a pariah in the blink of an eye. His partners were furious, his clients scandalized, and his reputation was in shambles. Kimberly had made sure of that, and the satisfaction in her voice when we spoke was almost chilling. As for Bella, she wasn't spared either. The news of her affair spread like wildfire. People whispered, gossiped, and dissected every ugly detail. She lost friends, faced judgment at work, and found herself socially isolated. Every bridge she built, on lies and manipulation, burned down around her, one by one. She called me several times, begging for mercy, asking me to stop the spread of information. But I ignored every call, every message. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with them. One night, a few weeks later, found myself sitting alone in a bar. It was quiet. A few other lonely souls scattered around, nursing their drinks in silence. I raised my glass, feeling a strange sense of peace, though it was tinged with sadness. I'd come out of this stronger, yes, but also different, hardened, cautious. The bartender gave me a sympathetic nod as he poured another drink. Rough night? He asked, his tone casual. I shrugged, a faint smile tugging at my lips. Just a rough year, man. He nodded knowingly. Well, here's to getting through it. As I clinked my glass, I thought about what I'd learned through all of this. Trust is fragile, and love, when betrayed, can turn even the gentlest soul into someone unrecognizable. But there's a strange strength in reclaiming yourself, in facing the darkness, and walking out the other side. And so, as I took that final sip, I raised an invisible toast to my future, a future I'd build on my own terms, wiser. And in some strange way, finally free, just as I thought life was settling back into a rhythm, a new rhythm, one that no longer included Bella. I received a letter, No name on the return address, just a plain white envelope. That looked as unassuming as a piece of junk mail. I was tempted to ignore it, but something about the handwriting felt oddly familiar. I tore it open, not quite ready for the shock waiting inside. The letter was from Bella. In it, she poured out words I'd never expected to read. Regret, desperation, pain. All the things she'd never shown me face to face were suddenly spilling across the page. She wrote about how, in the aftermath of everything, she'd lost everything. Her job, her friends, even her family's respect. She was utterly alone. And apparently, she was reaching out to me in some last attempt to claw her way back from the edge. But it wasn't her pleas for mercy that shook me. It was what she said next. There are things I never told you, Robert. Things that go beyond Richard. You think you know everything. But there are secrets I kept, even from him. Secrets that could change everything. If you knew the truth, I scoffed at first, reading it as one last desperate attempt to manipulate me. Classic Bella, trying to dangle a mystery in front of me, to pull me back in. But her words lingered in my mind, gnawing at me over the following days. I told myself not to care, not to let her get under my skin again. But every time I closed my eyes, her words echoed in my head. Finally, curiosity won out. I didn't want her back. I was sure of that. But I needed to know if she was lying, or if there was something more, some final piece of the puzzle I hadn't seen. So against my better judgment, I arranged to meet her. I told her it was her last chance to come clean, to tell me everything, but I wasn't promising forgiveness or anything close to it. We met at a small rundown diner. On the edge of town, I chose the place on purpose. Somewhere neutral. Somewhere we wouldn't be recognized. When she walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked worn, hollowed out, like the weight of everything had finally broken her. Her once polished confidence was gone, replaced by a kind of vulnerability that felt foreign. Robert, she greeted me, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't say anything, just nodded, and gestured for her to sit. She took a shaky breath and sat across from me, her eyes scanning my face, as if trying to find some trace of the man she used to know. Why are we here, Bella? I asked, cutting straight to the point. I didn't have patience for games anymore, she swallowed, glancing down at her hands. There's something you don't know. Something I couldn't tell you before? Her voice was trembling, but I stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. It's about the affair. It wasn't just about Richard? I raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. Oh, really? Was there another man then? Or are you going to tell me you fell out of love again? No, she whispered, her voice cracking. It was blackmail. Richard found out something about me, something from my past. He used it to get what he wanted. I was trapped, Robert. I laughed bitterly, unable to believe what I was hearing. Blackmail? That's what you're going with? You expect me to believe you were some helpless victim in all of this? She looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. I know I don't deserve your sympathy, Robert. I know I was cruel, that I hurt you, and I'll never ask you to forgive me. But I need you to understand. I didn't want any of this. There was something about her tone, something raw and desperate, that made me pause. She wasn't the same defiant, arrogant woman from before. She was unraveling, like someone cornered, with no way out. What could he possibly have held over you? I asked, not sure if I was ready to believe her, but morbidly curious all the same. She looked down, twisting her hands in her lap. When I was younger, there were things I did, things I'm not proud of. And somehow Richard found out. I don't even know how, but he threatened to tell everyone, to ruin me if I didn't. If I didn't keep him happy. Her words hung in the air between us, and for the first time, I saw a crack in her armor, a glimpse of something. That looked like genuine fear. So you let him blackmail you into an affair? I asked, struggling to wrap my head around it. For how long? A year, she whispered. It went on for a year, before I tried to end it, but he didn't let go. He started threatening to go public, with everything he knew, and I panicked. I was too scared to leave, and I didn't know how to tell you. I shook my head, feeling a mixture of disbelief and anger. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as another one of her lies, but there was something painfully real in her eyes. Why tell me now? I asked, my voice cold. Because I don't have anything left to lose, she said softly. You've taken everything, and I deserve that. But I couldn't live with myself. Without telling you the truth, I stared at her, trying to read the truth in her face. I wanted to hate her, to walk away and never look back, but her confession had cracked something open in me. A small voice asking if maybe, just maybe, I didn't know the full story. Even if that's true, Bella, I said finally, my voice steady. It doesn't change the fact that you chose to hurt me. You made a choice to keep lying. To keep digging that knife deeper. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know I did. And I hate myself for it. But you were right. I thought I was untouchable. And now I'm nothing. There was a long silence, both of us lost in the wreckage of what we'd once been. Part of me wanted to walk out, leave her to face the consequences of her choices alone. But another part of me, the part that still remembered, the woman I'd loved, felt a sliver of pity. Her arrogance had crumbled, her lies exposed, and all that was left was a broken person staring back at me. Bella, I said slowly, barely recognizing my own voice, you need to fix yourself. Whatever this was between you and Richard, whatever hold he had over you, it's over now. There's nothing left here. For either of us, she nodded, her face a mask of pain and regret. I know. I'm sorry, Robert. I'm so sorry. I stood up, looking down at her one last time. Goodbye, Bella. As I walked out of that diner, I felt a weight lift from my chest. I didn't know if her story was true, and maybe it didn't matter. What mattered was that I was finally free of the lies, the betrayal, the bitterness. She'd given me one last piece of the puzzle, but it was up to me to decide if I wanted to keep it or let it go. And as I stepped out into the sunlight, I realized I didn't need to hold on to anything from that past life anymore. I was ready to move on, stronger, wiser, and finally free. As I walked out of that diner, I felt like I'd closed the last chapter of a book I never wanted to read in the first place. But if I thought I'd gotten my closure, I was wrong. Just when I thought I'd left it all behind, life threw me a final twist, a twist I could never have seen coming. A few weeks after that meeting with Bella, I was beginning to settle into my new routine. Therapy sessions helped me untangle the mess in my head. Friends pulled me back into social circles, and work was picking up again. Life was slowly starting to feel normal, even good. Until one day, I received a call from a blocked number. Hello, I answered, my voice cautious. Robert, the voice on the other end was deep and calm. Too calm. I instantly felt the chill run down my spine. I knew that voice. It was Richard. What the hell do you want? I spat, gripping the phone tighter. The anger I thought I'd put to rest roared back to life. He chuckled softly, an unsettling sound that twisted my stomach. Now, no need for hostility. I just thought we should talk. Talk? Are you kidding me? After everything you and Bella put me through, you think I want to have a chat? There's more you don't know, he said, his voice turning serious. And I thought you deserved to hear it from me. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to hang up, block his number, and never look back. But that same nagging curiosity, the same itch that had driven me to meet Bella, stirred again. I hated it. I hated that he still had a hold on me, that he could make me doubt what I thought I knew. Against my better judgment, I decided to hear him out. Fine, talk, I replied coldly. There's a lot Bella didn't tell you, he said, his tone shifting to something darker. And I'm not talking about our affair. I'm talking about the reason. She was with you in the first place. What are you even talking about? I asked, feeling a mix of anger and confusion. Let's meet, he said, ignoring my question. I'll explain everything in person. It's delicate. I almost refused, but the unease in his voice caught my attention. It wasn't the arrogant Richard I'd seen before. This was a man who sounded genuinely afraid, against every instinct screaming at me to let it go. I found myself agreeing. We arranged to meet at a nondescript bar in a neighboring town, a place where neither of us would be recognized. When I arrived, Richard was already there, sitting in a shadowy corner booth, nursing a drink. He looked worse for wear, his usually slick appearance marred by unshaven stubble and dark circles under his eyes. He looked up as I approached, a flicker of something almost like relief. Crossing his face, Robert, he greeted me with a nod. I sat down, keeping my expression neutral. You've got 10 minutes? Make it worth my time. He chuckled, a hollow sound, then took a long sip of his drink. Fair enough. You know I never wanted things to go this far. But Bella, she's not who you think she is. I rolled my eyes, already regretting this. I think I know exactly who she is. A liar. A cheater. Manipulative. True, he admitted, his gaze shifting to his glass. But there's more. She wasn't just manipulating you. She was using you, Robert. She was using both of us. Using us? I asked, my patience wearing thin. What the hell does that even mean? He took a breath, then leaned in closer, lowering his voice. Bella's got a past neither of us knew about. I found out about it too late. She's done this before, you know. Found men, got what she wanted, and moved on. I laughed bitterly. What, so she's some kind of professional cheater? Give me a break, Richard. It's not just cheating, Robert. She's got a history of taking from men, manipulating them, then disappearing when she's done. Money, assets, influence, you name it. She targets people she thinks can give her something, and then she moves on. I thought I was special too, until I found out I was just the next target. I stared at him, trying to process his words. It sounded insane, but then again, the Bella I thought I knew was gone. I'd already seen one side of her I never imagined existed. Could this be another layer to the nightmare? You're telling me Bella what? Played both of us for money? For some kind of gain? He nodded grimly. She has a pattern, Robert. You weren't her first husband. And I wasn't her first affair? My mind reeled. Wait, what? I was her first husband. We've been married since college. He shook his head. That's what she told you. But it's not true. She was married once before. Years ago. Briefly to some older guy. The marriage didn't last long. But when it ended, she walked away with a small fortune. Sound familiar? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Bella had always told me I was her first, that she'd never been married before, and she'd certainly never mentioned. Walking away from another marriage with money, it was like a new betrayal was unraveling before me, layer by layer. Why didn't you tell me this before? I asked. My voice tight with anger and disbelief. Because I didn't know until recently, he admitted. I only found out after things started falling apart at work. I dug into her past, trying to figure out what kind of person I'd gotten involved with, and it turns out she's been doing this for years. I clenched my fists, my heart pounding. So what? She targets men, gets what she can, and then leaves? He nodded, his face a grim mask. That's exactly what she does. And you're not the last one on her list, Robert. Once she's done with you, she'll find another. Maybe she already has. The realization hit me like a punch in the gut. I'd spent years building a life with Bella, trusting her, believing her lies, while she was simply moving from one target to the next. And now that her game with me was over, she'd be on to her next victim. I leaned back in my seat, feeling a strange, hollow numbness settle over me. So why are you telling me this, Richard? What's in it for you? He sighed, rubbing his temples. Honestly, maybe it's guilt. Maybe I just want her to finally face the consequences of what she's done. She's hurt too many people, and it's time she stops getting away with it. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I saw someone who wasn't my enemy. We were both victims in Bella's twisted game, both left broken and betrayed by the same woman. What do you want to do about it? I asked, feeling a strange sense of unity with this man I'd once despised. He met my gaze, a flicker of determination in his eyes. Expose her? Together? She thinks she's untouched, that she can keep moving from one life to the next, leaving a trail of destruction. But this time we make sure there's nowhere left for her to run. A small dark smile crept onto my face. I warned her not to challenge me, Richard. She didn't listen. Maybe now it's time she learns the hard way. We spent the rest of the evening hashing out a plan, our shared anger and betrayal binding us together in a way I never thought possible. By the time we left the bar, I knew we were about to give Bella a taste of her own medicine, a dose of justice that had been long overdue. This time there would be no more games, no more manipulation. We were going to expose Bella for who she really was, and she wouldn't see it coming. Richard and I spent the next few days piecing together every shred of evidence we could find on Bella, every lie she told, every deceitful twist in her tangled past. It was all coming together like pieces of a dark puzzle. And the more we uncovered, the clearer it became that Bella was a master at hiding her tracks. She had left a trail of broken lives behind her, but none had ever connected her deceit to its source. Until now, together we tracked down a few of her previous targets, the men she'd manipulated before she met me. Each story was painfully familiar, each man recounting how Bella had swept into his life, full of charm and promises, only to leave him shattered and broke. It wasn't hard to gain their trust. After all, they too had been fooled by the same woman. They were eager to help, to finally have their chance at closure. And with their help, we constructed a story, a timeline of deception. That spanned nearly a decade. It was almost impressive. How flawlessly she'd moved, from one life to the next, reinventing herself, with each new victim. But that wasn't going to happen this time. This time her past would finally catch up with her. We decided to host an event of sorts. Richard pulled some strings at his firm, renting out a small conference room, under the guise of a corporate gathering. On the day of, he and I arrived early, setting up the room, with everything we needed, documents, photos, recorded testimonies, everything that exposed Bella's pattern of manipulation and lies. We wanted this to be public. We wanted her to have nowhere to hide. Bella thought she was coming to talk things over with Richard, to maybe salvage what little reputation she had left. She had no idea that we'd invited her entire social circle, friends, family members, even a few of her colleagues. Richard and I sat at the head of the room, waiting for her to arrive, feeling the weight of years of anger and betrayal simmering beneath the surface. Finally, she walked in, glancing around with that smug, detached expression I'd come to know so well. She spotted Richard first, and then me, her eyes widening in surprise and suspicion. What is this?" she asked, forcing a nervous laugh as she looked around the room, noticing familiar faces turning toward her, some of them already whispering. For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. "Sit down, Bella," I said calmly. Gesturing to a chair in the center of the room, she hesitated, her gaze darting between me and Richard. But the murmurs of the crowd around her made it clear she didn't have much choice. Slowly, she sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Richard stood up first, a stack of papers in his hand. "Bella, we thought it was time for everyone to hear the truth about you," he said, his voice steady and commanding. "About what? I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is insane." "Is it?" I replied, standing up and joining Richard. "Because we have proof, Bella. Proof of everything." With that, we began to present our case. Piece by piece, we showed photos, text messages, records of her past marriages, and testimonies from the other men she deceived. Each revelation drew gasps from the crowd, her friends and family staring at her, in shock, disbelief, and disgust. Her mask cracked more. With each piece of evidence, her face pale, her eyes wide with horror. "Stop," she whispered, her voice trembling as she tried to stand up. "This isn't true. None of it is true." But it was too late. Richard pulled out the final blow, a recorded testimony from one of her past husbands, detailing the manipulation, the lies, the money she'd taken, and left him with nothing. It was undeniable. She couldn't spin her way out of it this time. "You've hurt so many people, Bella," I said, my voice heavy with the weight of everything she'd done. "You think you're untouchable? That you can just move on to the next life? The next victim? But that ends today. Everyone here knows who you really are." Tears streamed down her face as she looked around the room, searching for anyone who might believe her. But there was no sympathy left in those eyes, no one left to manipulate. Even her closest friends looked away, unable to reconcile the woman they thought they knew with the truth that lay bare before them. I never meant," she stammered. But her words trailed off, choked by the weight of her lies. For the first time, she looked small, broken, just another person caught in the wreckage she'd created. The silence in the room was deafening. Slowly, people began to stand up and walk out, each one leaving her more isolated, more alone. By the time everyone had left, it was just the three of us, me, Richard, and Bella, sitting in the ruins of her carefully constructed world. She looked at me, her eyes desperate, pleading. "Robert, please. I know I've done terrible things, but I love you. I really do." I shook my head, feeling nothing but emptiness as I looked at what remained of the woman I once loved, the woman who'd manipulated so many lives for her own gain. "Love?" I said quietly. "You don't know the meaning of the word." She reached out, trying to grab my hand, but I pulled away. "Please," she whispered. "Give me one more chance. I can change. I can be better." Richard laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "How many times have you said that? To how many men? Before you destroyed their lives too?" She flinched at his words, like they were physical blows. I stood up slowly, looking down at her. This shell of a person who'd caused so much pain. "Goodbye, Bella. I hope it was worth it." And with that, we both walked out, leaving her alone, with nothing but the echoes of her own deceptions. As we stepped into the evening air, Richard turned to me. "You okay?" I nodded slowly. "I will be. For the first time in years, I actually will be." The truth had finally come out. The web of lies unraveled, and though the pain wasn't gone, I knew I'd survived. I'd exposed the truth, and in doing so found my own strength, my own path forward, free from her manipulation, free from the past, ready to start again.